Stop letting race dictate your path in life. Today I want to make this video to talk about the elephant in the room, right? I saw a post on Rednote, which is a social media app. I've seen several posts of folks asking about China or different parts of Asia and if black people are welcome, right? As someone that considers themselves a global citizen and someone that's lived all over the world and someone currently living in Singapore, I moved here with my family, my wife and two kids last year. I felt the need to weigh in on this topic, right? Because, you know, whether we're talking Germany, Europe, or some of the places that I've been to, right? People ask this question a lot, and I get it. But for myself, right? I grew up, those that don't know, I grew up in the Deep South, right? I've had horrible experiences with being threatened, racial experiences. I've had weapons pointed at me. You know, I've had some pretty horrible experiences that just didn't turn out well, right? You know, and so if I'm not just someone that's just saying, okay, you know, stop letting race dictate your circumstances, right? Because I've had some horrible experiences, right? And I don't want to share too many of those stories, right? But I get it, right? Because the fundamental human nature that people feel is to feel safe, right? And so there is hate everywhere in this world, right? Whether we're talking the US, whether we're talking Asia, whether we're talking Europe, if you look hard enough, you're going to always find someone that maybe engages in discriminatory behavior or that's just plain old ignorant, right? Let me share my screen here, right? Because I'll show you what prompted this, right? And so we have a post here on Rednote where someone says, "Hello, Chinese friends. Are black people welcome in China? I would love to visit someday." Some of the comments have been very encouraging, right? We don't discriminate against race-only behavior in Chinese communities. There's no need to highlight the race. We are all just people. My response to that would be, I think that their heart was in the right place, but the unfortunate truth of it is there is discrimination, whether it's your sexuality, whether it's race, and it's not just black. It could be Latino, could be Hispanic, it could be Asian, right? I think to not acknowledge that there's ignorance in this world is irresponsible, but I think I get where that person's heart was coming from. But I want to highlight on a conversation I had with a couple folks here, right? I had a friend that I was talking to recently, and I shared that, yeah, black people don't like to be stared at, right? And I made that statement kind of in jest, right? Because we're not monolithic. Not all black folks are the same. But, you know, he asked what I meant by that. And what I said by that is I told him, I'm like, do you know what sundown towns are? And he was like, no, it's a sundown town, right? I've been through sundown towns in the Deep South in the U.S., right? And what it means is just that if you look like me, there are certain towns that, yes, even now in 2025, they make it known that if you are there when the sun goes down, it's GG's. And by GG's, I mean you could come to physical and bodily harm, right? The fact that that still exists is wild, right? I remember I was working for a tech company years ago, and I was hosting a group of engineers, some really talented engineers from Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, you name it, and I took them to their first gun show. Right. And I told them before you went into the gun show, right, in North Carolina, that, hey, when you go into this warehouse, you're going to see some things, right? Just remain calm and just observe, right? And what they saw was just that there was a table for Nazi paraphernalia. There was some white supremacy tables there with different badges and different things that kind of promoted white supremacy, right? And this is normal, right? And they were shocked, right? When I told people here about sundown towns, they were just like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean past a certain time? I'm like, yeah, there are certain towns where it's just, you know, if you look like me, you just don't go, right? And so I said all that to say that context is important. When you're trying to understand, right, why people act the way they act or why they have certain predilections, right? Context is important, right? So I saw a lot of comments on this post that said that, you know, hey, this is a very weird question, right? Why would you ask this question? And so this goes back to my first point when I said black people don't like being stared at, right? Living here in Singapore, everyone has been welcoming, right? We've had an overwhelmingly positive experience here, but every time we step out the door, we get stared at. Now, my son, we have two German Shepherds, two large dogs, because large dogs are very rare here, right? My son and I are both tall, right? So we stick out, right? We don't blend in, which is fine, right? And so people will stare, right? Because, you know, we're large people, we're large individuals, right? But I've traveled enough to know that exactly how I look to some folks, right? But I'd be remiss if I did say that in the back of my mind sometimes, right? My default thinking is just like, well, is this person looking at me because I don't belong? Why are they staring at me, right? You know, is it because they're having some sort of, you know, racist thought. Like, again, when I say people don't like being stared at, I think when I see posts like this where people want to know if black people are welcome, that is where it is coming from. Right now, I have moved through this world. I've been very fortunate and blessed to work in the tech industry. Right, ignorance exists out there. Right, what I would say to people of color that are thinking about moving to a different part of the world, you have every right to do your due diligence and make sure that you're going to be safe, or make sure that your family is safe. But we can't let fear dictate how we move through this world, because the ignorance wins. They just do. Right, and so I'm black everywhere in the world, right? I've had good experiences, I've had bad experiences, right? I try not to let that dictate my future, right? Because it would rob me of the rich cultural experience that I have by living in different parts of the world, being blessed enough to just have been well traveled, and I'm raising my kids to be global citizens, right? So I try not to let the negative dictate my moves, because then they win. But I also want to provide some context to some folks, right? Because when they're just like, well, why do black people ask weird questions like that? That's a weird thing to say. It's because, if you look at the history, right, and some of the trauma that some of us have experienced, right, I even have friends to this day now that said that, look, I didn't know racism was still a thing in 2025. I didn't know sundown towns were a thing. Like, I've never had, a bad experience in my life, or some of my best friends are black, right? And so I think I long for a world in which we stop making everything about race. That's not what this video is about. This video is about providing context and a perspective. Maybe someone out there is going to see this video and say, I didn't know that was a thing. And I encourage you, Google it. Google it for yourself, right? There's too much talking on the internet where people are just taking their news and their perspective and they're getting it from different talking heads and sound bites. I encourage you to research things for yourself, right? Now, I'm not going to debate my own traumatic experiences, right? Because I lived through it. I lived through some of these horrible things where I've had weapons pointed at me and things of that nature, right? So that's not up for debate, right? But just Google sundown towns, right? So maybe the next time, someone asks a question such as like, okay, am I going to be welcomed, right? I think the knee-jerk reaction is to, it's not a knock on China or any Asian country, right? I don't think these people on Red Note, or whether it's Red Note or TikTok or any app, are trying to offend and say that, look, are you going to treat me safely, right? It comes from a place of just genuine ignorance, right? Just we don't understand it. We want to make sure, right? And so if I can do my part by spreading positivity into the world and perspective, that's what this channel is for. That's what this video is for, right? But for those that are people of color, right, there are lots of things happening in the world right now that 2025 is off to a interesting start, right? Tomorrow is not promised, right? And so you hear me talk a whole lot about my experiences here. But if you're considering moving abroad or getting out of the U.S. and moving to a different country, do your due diligence, do your research, but don't let fear dictate your moves, because they win. Right? Understand the culture. When you move to a new country, get to know the locals, we are a very curious family, right? And so we have been fortunate enough to be welcomed into people's homes here for dinners. I do a lot of networking, right? But I do it with empathetic intent, right? I don't just network for the sake of networking. I really did come to Singapore and with the idea to spend time in Greater Asia, understanding the history here, understanding the geopolitical scene, understanding the background, understanding people's perspectives. And I do that by shutting up and by listening. Right. When I forge these genuine connections, right, I am genuinely curious about the people around me. And I think that empathy and that authenticity shows, right? It shows when I talk to people. It shows when I connect with people. Right. So by engaging in practices like that, I think that's how we overcome race. That's how we overcome certain bigoted and ignorant assumptions that we make about each other. Right. By approaching your life and approaching your social network, the spirit of curiosity and humbleness and humility. Right. This idea that, oh, my gosh, I come from the best country in the world and that we're the best, like that needs to just stop. Right. There's a lot of that roaming around. I'm very much against that. Right. I try to lead with humility and lead with love. But I wanted to weigh in on this topic. I'll be posting over there on Red Note, about this. And I just wanted to open up the dialogue, right, and just provide a little bit of context, right? You never know what people's past experiences have been, and it drives why questions like that are being asked. But don't let negative experiences, right? And I've had my fair share of them, but it does not get to dictate how I move through this world, right? And if I can say anything and leave you with anything, lead with humility, lead with intent, right? And just stop assuming that there's a tomorrow. Stop assuming that, you're going to have a year, right, to make the changes that you want to make, right? Get on it, do it now. There's no time like the present. That's my piece. See you soon.